but never as quickly and as fast as in the past, let's say, 20, 30 years. And we've heard of many different business models that have been changed due to that. For example, videos, many other things. And one of the businesses and one of the fields that as well needs a lot of input from people like you and us is actually media. So I'm very glad to welcome on stage Finn and C3O from the Media Lab. And they will talk a bit about that. Thank you. And if you have questions, please keep them till the end. We will have 15 minutes allotted for Q&A at least. So have fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is the mic on? Yeah, perfect. So our talk is about rethinking online news, although to be honest, we think the online qualifier will soon be unnecessary. Already it's obvious that the print circulation of newspapers is dropping very much, and in the US, it dropped by 50% alone over the last decade. And obviously this is not a crowd I need to explain to that it's a bad idea to print news on dead trees and ship it around the country. So where do those people who don't read the newspaper anymore get their news from these days? And it's mostly the online versions of these same papers. One of the issues here is that they still haven't quite figured out the business model of online-only news. They're making most of their profits off the print version still, even as it is declining. And sites like the New York Times are experimenting with a paywall where you have to pay after reading a bunch of articles per month, which might work at the scale of the New York Times, but will mean the death of many local media outlets as their print versions die. And the second big issue is that we believe that these online versions of print articles have not, the media agencies have not rethought the possibilities of the medium enough, and they have just copied what they've been doing for centuries in the print world and copied that to the online world. And we think there's a lot of paradigms that need to be rethought and that hackers are the ones to contribute here. These sites pretty much are encyclopediabritannica.com, when what we really need is the equivalent of Wikipedia in the dictionary and encyclopedia industry. So already in the past couple of years, people like Dave Weiner with RSS or Julian Assange or the founders of Julian Assange and the team at WikiLeaks and the founders of Twitter have done more to transform how news is created and presented and transformed than traditional media organizations have. And so to further this trend, we're here to recruit you to think about the changing media landscape and the role technologists play in there to bridge the gap, the divide between journalists and technologists, and use the technologies that we're best at and that we are good at and know how to use to distribute knowledge, increase transparency, empower people, and all these other core hacker values that you can live up to in journalism. So let's hack the news. We're first going to mention a list of assumptions that we think most traditional online news sources have not rethought, that we think are ripe for rethinking. Then explain some open questions and open issues to work on that would be interesting and show some examples, show our own project to tackle some of these issues, and give you some pointers on how you could start your own. So assumptions ripe for rethinking. Traditional media sends out reporters to be at the scene where something newsworthy happens, and they have to be there very fast. And obviously this is an obvious point that is being disrupted by technology because average citizens have always-on publishing and recording devices in their pocket that rival any reporter. So the role of news media has to shift from being on the scene to detecting what other people who are already on the scene are saying and curating that and fact-checking it and lending their authority and audience to that. So instead of winning the morning by having the most up-to-date headline and breaking the news, that's something you need on paper because you're competing at the newsstand with your headline. But online, you're competing in the link economy, and you want to be the source that is most linked to, which is a totally different issue. And you don't need to be the fastest You need to be the most authoritative, the most in-depth, the most easily explained, the most usably designed, and so on news source, and not the fastest. Another thing that was copied from the print world, pretty much unquestioned, was writing news articles, right? Something happens, you write an article, you sit, the journalist goes out, researches, fact checks, reports, and then has to finish this article by this deadline because the print run is then, and you can't ever change that article again. On the web, that's completely, you don't have to do this, use this paradigm at all. You think of things like streams of multimedia bits, tweets, and so on. Think of ever-changing articles like on Wikipedia, but no current popular news site does anything except publish finished articles that are then not looked at again and replaced by new articles when something new changes. Instead, news, we think, should be, or there's an opportunity online to understand news as a process and to share that process more than just the finished product. You also don't have to cover everything. If you buy a printed newspaper, you want to be informed of everything that's happening in the world. But online, there's something called a hyperlink, and you really don't need 1,000 news sources copying the same Associated Press articles all over again just to keep you on their domain and keep your eyeballs to their banner ads. So there's an opportunity here to focus on something you really can be best on and link to all the rest. Traditional newspapers also pick and choose some columnists, op-ed columnists, to analyze the news for us and tell us what to think, pretty much, or give their opinion. And online, you have a much better opportunity to foster the community of your readers and make their voices heard, and that opinion leaders emerge from there rather than this top-down, authority-based approach that traditional news sources do. Also, they always act all-knowing and are incapable of admitting fallibility, because I imagine every journalist researching a topic has next to their laptop a sheet of paper with a list of open questions, things they don't yet know, things they haven't found the right person to ask, and so on. And all this is completely transparent to us. But on the web, it can be transparent. We can see the journalist sources behind the finished article, but it isn't shared with us. And then, of course, the remaining issue is that it's a broadcast medium, and you have a gatekeeper, and you have a centralized place. And I'm sure hackers can come up with more interesting ways of peer-to-peer distribution and so on. But it's kind of unclear what the future model there should be.
So working on our own project and now researching the general online journalism field, we found some very interesting fields and questions that we think are worth your attention and could excite you to work on them. And the first one is very basic, and it's how news comes to be. As Christoph already said, everyone has a device that can be the basic of news in your pockets. You can photograph things, you can go on Twitter and tweet about your breakfast. The question is, how do we decide what the general public has to know, which things stay secret, which things are just not interesting? How can we get rid of the gatekeepers, or at least make them better? As I said, Twitter is one example that changed some of that, or all the social networks, actually. WikiLeaks is also basically working in that area, helping people get out news. On a more basic level, the sites like spot.us, that community fund reporting where journalists can offer, I'm interested in this topic. If you give me this amount of money, I will research this more and publish articles about that, whatever I find out. Like that, we can maybe democratize news a little bit and change what the mainstream media has to publish. The fields that's most interesting to us is how news is presented, because we keep complaining about this form of article. Once final, always final. Nothing ever happens to it. But what about media streams? What about anything else the web makes possible? Mainstream media organizations sometimes experiment with topic pages. Google had an experiment running with the Washington Post and the New York Times for a while. That was actually pretty good for topic pages. The New York Times itself has a great topic pages that actually links to other media on the internet, not only the New York Times, and has regularly updated summaries about whatever issue the topic pages are on. And surprisingly, at least the English Wikipedia has good write-ups on current global concerns event, but it really fails at more local events where there's no critical mass of Wikipedians available for doing the research. And it also fails because it doesn't allow original research, which is basically what we want journalists to do, right? So that's an interesting question. Think about it. One that's better answered by now, at least for me, is how news finds me, my personal makeup of news sources. And that, for me, is RSS feeds, different social media. I'd put Google Plus on it if they let me in. And relatively open relevancy filters like Reddit that do a good job of diversifying my sources of news a little bit. But you can see all of these are either my friends or things that I know I care about. What about fields I don't know and I don't know I would care about or would interest me? I'm kind of caught in a filter bubble here that we didn't have when big newspapers just handed us information and we didn't have anything more than this thing to read. But all of this is encompassed also by the issue of how to understand things better. How can I have more context? How can I have infographics, intro videos, explaining terms for issues that are not trivial, like the economic crisis, which we think the mainstream media just did a horrible job of explaining, and we should be able to do better and explain better and understand better. One part of this is also understanding the data, what journalists base the facts on, what journalists know, what governments and organizations release due to Freedom of Information Acts or leaks. And data needs to be processed, analyzed, and then given to people to try to understand. Interesting projects in that area are my favorite, the Overview project by the AP, which basically is an industrial-grade information analysis and dissemination tool that allows the AP to, and everyone else, because it's open source, to visualize huge data dumps like the WikiLeaks Iraq dumps. If you look at the middle, the very interesting clusters of words that suggests further exploration by journalists, or us, because we actually have the sources. One other all-time favorite is Ujahidi, which basically is a mapping tool that was in use in crises, for example, in Haiti at the earthquake. And the premise is, if you're there, if you're a citizen there, you can text message emergencies, information you think other people should know, to a central location, and these will be mapped and published not only for emergency operations use, but also for journalistic purposes to allow more people to know what's going on. And recently, the Guardian data blog has been publishing really good information and context analysis from data dumps by the British government, and it's really worth checking out. Of course, there's more, but we only have so much time. Another question is the dreaded comment section under articles. It usually fails to be interesting or even civil, and we want you to think about how to change that, how to make it better. We obviously want to measure sentiment, public reactions, but we want to do it better than people now do it. How do we replace the polls and comment sections, expand on them? Reddit is one example that allows rating of comments on articles, not only articles, so that we know which comments are the most interesting ones. And also, a very old technology, trackbacks, allowed discussions in the blogosphere, have been for years, but I can't really make sense of any of the short versions of the trackbacks here. So it really needs some better design, more thinking, and basically rating is just a beginning. We need something better. Also in that is, how can we empower readers to act upon information? As a news site, we write about issues of public interest. We may write about catastrophes in faraway lands or not so faraway lands, and we also already have the traffic. Why not use it to coordinate volunteer responses, or at least direct the traffic to somewhere that does that, and to people who desperately need help, helping people. The million-dollar question is, of course, how to make it sustainable, and really we don't have an answer. Financially, that is. People try to do less better. People are looking into crowdsourcing parts of the journalistic process, like the data gathering part. Micropayment providers like Flatter also help independent players join the conversation and do citizen journalism. But we don't know if, in the long term, anyone can make a living out of journalism without philanthropists or state grants stepping in and deciding this journalism is something we as a society want, and we better fund it. But again, maybe you have better ideas. We are not finance gurus. And the last of my points is how to empower and protect journalists themselves. This is a training issue. We know journalists know the physical dangers when they're in conflict zones, when they're reporting undercover somewhere, but often these journalists or their sources don't know the dangers inherent in communication with employers or contacts, and go to unnecessary risks because they don't know what risks there are. The Internet in the Suitcase project by the United States government is kind of weird, but might help that. The Tor project has been used for that for ages now, and it's been really helpful. And you know, maybe there will be a hacker satellite up there someday that can help too. Other ideas are always welcome.
Okay, so this was a big list of open issues and unanswered questions. Can you switch me over? But we don't just have questions, we have some proposed solutions as well. And so we have come up with our example of, let's see here, this is kind of an article-less news source. So we've been criticizing articles in this talk, and we think those just aren't the best way to communicate something on the web. And here's a concept of a news site that works without articles altogether, and that assumes that people who arrive at these pages don't necessarily arrive from the front page of a medium on the day a story breaks, which is the assumption that most newspapers make, again, from their print history, but that people arrive at a news site through a link from a social network, through a search engine result, hours later, days later, months later, and that these sites need to provide a lot more context than they do nowadays. How often have you seen a news article, read it, were confused by it, and then noticed that it was from 2007 or something, which was not made obvious at all? So this article here starts with a header section that tells you the current headline. It tells you where this topic, where this issue, this newsworthy event has occurred, when it occurred, and whether it is still an active thing and the site is being updated regularly, or whether this is old and stale. This is the news meter thing here in the corner. So instead of articles, you have topic pages here that change over time and that keep their URL static. So over time, this site would gain authority, gain page rank, gain inbound links as people link to it to explain issues. And then the article at the bottom has two columns. One of them we call the news stream, which is a short multimedia stream of sources behind this news topic. So if you're familiar with my other project, Soup.io, this is kind of like having a soup for each breaking news event. So this lists an imported tweet from one of the people involved, something that someone just said into a microphone this second, and the journalist sent it in with their cell phone, a user contribution that was sent in on the web, a link to a different medium talking about this issue, which is also something you hardly ever see on news sources today, embedded videos, and so on. So a stream of real-time updates that you can subscribe to if you really care about this on Twitter or via RSS or whatever, and that you can also suggest new items into. On the other column, we have a continuously growing article. So this is kind of like Wikipedia, but in this case written by paid journalists, because as Finn mentioned before, since we're targeting mostly local political events here, we found that, for example, for this sample article that we picked, for this sample story, an Austrian local political scandal, there's just no coverage on Wikipedia. The critical mass doesn't seem to be there. And so this is written by paid journalists, and it grows over time like a wiki article, and changes are always highlighted in yellow here based on when I personally last visited that page. And of course, there's a history. I can replay this. This would be like Google Wave, where I can see at what point in time this article looked like what. And it starts with a bulleted list, again, of completely contextless information. Why should I care about this? Why is this relevant to me? What's the current status? And then there's an image explaining who the people involved are. There's a fact section. There's an analysis section. There's infographics to explain points. And finally, there's this stakeholder section, which you can think of as like an IMDb for news, where you have the cast and crew of this topic, and you can check out what else they are involved in. And as this article grows longer and longer, it becomes harder to read, of course, so that's why there would be a function for journalists, for the people writing this article, to collapse several paragraphs into one, so that you can have an easier to read, shorter article, and then zoom into issues that you care more about. At the bottom here, we have a reaction section, which tries to go beyond traditional comments to offer, first of all, some specific functions like submitting factual corrections, where you can select something on the page and say, this is wrong. But also a Q&A section, which you can think of as a Quora or a Stack Overflow for each of these breaking news topics, where people can request from the journalists more research on certain topics, clarifications, and this, again, is ranked by the readers to give the journalist pretty much a to-do list of what next to research and what next to explain, so to get much more of a two-way communication going. This opinion section that we also alluded to allows people to take items from the article and from the news stream and from several different articles, combine them and draw their own conclusions. So I could take something from a few political articles and then underneath that write, and that's why you should vote for this party over this party, or that's why. So these kinds of opinions and conclusions you would leave to the readers of the site, and they get their own pages where they can build up their own authority, get their own followers. This is kind of what someone like FIFA is doing now, but built into the actual news site itself. Although, of course, it should work off-site as well, so FIFA should be showing up here as well, if he refers to these articles. So yeah, that's the basics. There's a small poll here at the bottom that would allow us, this is very, very, very simple, but would allow us to do some metric-based iteration on this article to improve and do some A/B tests and how to best explain topics and so on, which is also an opportunity that traditional news sources are just not taking. This, unfortunately, is a mock-up only so far, and we have applied to different sources of funding. Finn is going to tell you more about those. We got to the finalist round, but were ultimately rejected. So now we're bootstrapping this as an open source project, the software to run sites like this. And we're obviously looking for contributors, so if you're interested, come catch us afterwards. We think, in general, a structure like this would, first of all, use journalists' effort more efficiently, because you don't have to rewrite a new article explaining from the top every time something happens, or leave that out and then leave readers confused. And it allows readers, for the first time, to follow every topic at the depth, at whatever depth and frequency they want to follow this. So if I really care about this issue, I can click the subscribe button and be updated in real time of everything that happens. If I don't care about it that much, but think I should know what this is about, I can just check it on the night before the election to make a more informed decision. And I can still, at any point in time, be as informed as someone who has been following this from the start. We've also, for this article, we've covered this sample topic on 3 different days to see how this article would evolve over time. And you can see here the very first version would be really short. There's no facts out yet. It's just a rumor. There's a note here saying this changes in real time. You can stay on this page, and new things will drop in as we find out more. So this is visualizing the process behind the news. And then on day 2, as more and more details come available, here highlighted in yellow, there's also a live video. So this news feed would also have to support live streaming content. So I'd just like to ask, who here thinks that news presented this way could be more effective and that you would like to read and consume news this way? Is there anyone who thinks this would be an improvement? Wow, that's great. Okay, nice vote of confidence. Thanks.
And since you're all still here, I'm sure you want to hear how to actually get into this. And by this, I mean either help us or create a competitor to whatever we are doing.
Please steal our ideas, please.
And the traditional way, I'm not expecting you to do this, but the traditional way to get into journalism is always via internships or university studies. And actually, the interesting things happening here. Medill University in the US is giving scholarships to technologists who want to enroll in the journalist program. That's what Boing Boing says to that. But that is actually a pretty good thing, and it's happening all over the world. People want hackers to come into journalism to contribute just like we do. Another thing that's really interesting in that regard is Mozilla has a project called Drumbeat that has a journalism part, and they have challenges going on to different subsets of problems of news. And winners of these challenges also get internships at big online news sources. I think the BBC, the New York Times, and some others are on this list. So you can check them out if that sounds interesting. You may also already have a project idea in your head and be thinking about what to do now. And probably we're in Europe, you're thinking grants. Well, good luck. We researched grants in Austria, and yes, there are local journalism grants. There are many of them, but most, if not all, are targeted at newspapers. Some interesting papers are actually getting grants in Austria. Some church papers are in there and everything, but there seems to be no single innovation in journalism fund or grant in Austria that we could find. Luckily, we're better off internationally. The Night News Challenge is an annual contest that is a US-based program, but everyone in the world can apply. We applied, got into the final round, and done nothing, sadly. But they're really cool people, and the projects they funded this year are some things we are really excited about. The overview project I mentioned earlier was one of them. Another, the kind of international equivalent to the Night Challenge is the IPI News Contest that just started this year. And they're trying to concentrate mainly on Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, but they're considering themselves worldwide too. So these are interesting places to go to if you need a lot of money. But as we're hackers, some of you will probably think we're bootstrapping. And this seems to be a valid choice, at least for me. Citizen journalism has been on the rise ever since you've been able to reach big audiences over the internet. Crowdfunding platforms also make it relatively easy nowadays to collectively fund projects as long as they are interesting enough. So you could go in that direction. But even with money, you will be missing one central part for your project, and that is collaborators. If you're in English-speaking countries, you're in luck. There are regular meetups called Hacks Hackers. If you didn't know, hack is a short term for journalists, apparently. And this is a network of journalists and technologists who rethink the future of news and information according to themselves. There are meetings in over a dozen, mostly English-speaking cities, and I'd be really excited if some of you made it there and contributed there. In German-speaking countries, we don't really have any of those, and we're actually trying to start a culture of meetings between technologists and journalists. We will have our inaugural meeting tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. in front of the Hack Center, and we'll try to organize at least one thing in Vienna in mid-September, but we are obviously hoping for you guys to step in and say, we're interested in that, let's create a network of these things, and let's create events all over, at least all over Europe. I'm expecting more. And we could do that. So you should either talk to us now, because we're basically done, or come tomorrow at 1:30 to the front of the Hack Center. Collide.es is a very basic page, but we already have RSS feeds going, so if you're interested in that, just subscribe and we'll try to keep you updated. And we are basically at the question stage.
Thank you very, very much. So if you have questions, please come in front. Yeah, there's already one.
My question is, as you had your example article, I noticed that it was about an Austrian politician, but it was in English. And I wonder, maybe it is of more relevant for German-speaking or reading people. Yeah. So is it planned like the Wikipedia project for many languages, or is it English only?
So this article was in English because we wanted to show the English-speaking grant organizations that we were applying to what this would look like, but we wanted to start with a topic that was close to our own lives, so that's why it's an Austrian interest topic, but in English. Of course, so there's actually two projects here. We want to develop the software and have it open source and have people all over the world be able to start mediums and sites. We tried talking to one local Austrian newspaper to get them excited about those ideas, but it was like running up against the wall, and there's so many vested interests there, and that's how we've always done things. We're not interested in experimenting. But But so it's developing the software, which of course is language agnostic, and it's running an actual sample medium to figure out, for example, how the journalistic process will change if you have that kind of end product. How do you decide when to collapse paragraphs? How do you decide which topics to cover at all, and so on? So there's lots of things we think we have to learn by doing. So we have these two projects going on, developing the software and running a Vienna-based Austrian German-speaking medium to experiment with that. But of course, then documenting what we learned there in English, because we hope to inspire people across the border from Austria.
It would actually be exciting to run an English-speaking Austrian medium because there doesn't seem to be a good English source of Austrian local news. But I think having a larger potential readership at this point is probably a good idea.
Of course. But in general, let's not make this so much about questions to us, but if you are thinking about something that needs to be improved in journalism or news sites, if something frustrates you all the time, please speak up and share it with the crowd. So it's not us, the experts, we're just guys like you.
So we have a question from the internet.
Yeah, at first you should know that the originator of this question was very impressed by your excellent talk, quoting here. And he's wondering if you think that the old corporate media can survive this shift, or will they be destroyed? By the change?
In my personal opinion, it's going to be really, really tricky for them to make this shift. You see the music industry, you see all these other industries becoming disrupted by technology, pretty much being entirely clueless about how to keep up with the pace of change. And really, that no newspaper has experimented with going beyond the same printed article format that they've done for decades seems to me to suggest that they're not very innovative in this regard and stick to what they know. And the whole process is geared towards this end result. The whole, their work contracts with their journalists, everything is geared towards the traditional model. So I am not expecting big things from the incumbents. Of course, companies like The Guardian and the New York Times are trying to experiment and being innovative. But what's really the problem is that the local news sources are going to die because they don't have a business model anymore. They can't run classifieds and make money that way anymore. Advertising will move to the web, to specialized sites where you can target people more closely. So these are the sites we need to save. These are the local issues. Who watches what's happening in City Hall? This is what's going to be the big problem in the future.
I would like to defend the old dead trees news, because when I'm reading the newspaper in the paper form, I am sure that nobody has changed it. So we already seen that publishers have tendency to change data as seen in the Kindle in 1984. So we need to make somehow sure that publishers, when they go into the internet, they do not change articles, or when they change articles, they store history of those changes. Your webpage is wonderful because it stores history, but what can ensure me that my local newspaper is doing it?
Right. Can I say something? So I think that's an excellent point, and it's definitely something someone should be working on. I know one project that there's a blog out there tracking the changes in headlines on foxnews.com, which is really enlightening how they, over time, switch things around and cover the same story in a completely different light and adjust it to their political message. So that's one of examples where we need that kind of tracking.
First of all, I think it's a fantastic project. Thanks so much for your talk, and thanks so much for doing this. I think it's very needed. I have two questions that are sort of related. First of all, who do you want to have as contributors? Because you were talking about journalists. Would that mean accredited journalists that are already working with the mainstream medium? What about some person that has a podcast, but it's very not mainstream? Wouldn't you want to have precisely these people in? So like, how do you decide who gets to have access privileges? Who are these people? And secondly, and related to this, how do you check your facts? Because you talked about Wikipedia, for instance. Wikipedia is lovely, but at the end of the day, it becomes a shoutocracy. So, those who shout loudest win, and that's not necessarily what is true. So how do you make sure that you don't get 10 people that are somehow well-known, but say this is what it is, but in reality, the true story is another one? How do I get that in there? So what's your thoughts on fact-checking or on making sure that different perspectives are reflected accurately?
Huge question. For one, the fact-checking part, for one, we want to, in our mock-up, there is already a function to say, submit factual correction, and that is basically something that we've never seen in the wild before. Also, as bosses of a fictional journalistic empire, we would of course need to background check journalists when they enter, and always do quality assurance inside. Who we consider as journalists is basically as long as we can trust someone to write well and be an integrity, personally, an integrity, and we trust them not to lie, we would probably allow them to contribute to us.
Follow-up question, there was the story of Lilian Kalin. I don't know if you followed that. But I mean, would that be you as an individual trying to figure out whether or not I'm trustworthy? Because there was this story, right, of this lady, Lilian Khalil, that was writing for a newspaper. She claimed she had all kinds of connections. Later it turned out I don't want to talk about the story, but she's probably not who she claims she is. So, but are you saying that you yourself, or you'd hire someone that tries to figure out how trustworthy journalists are, right? Or wouldn't you want to crowdsource that as well? I mean, I know you don't have the answers because it's an ongoing project. I basically want to raise this as one very important issue, because just because I get in there and you trust me as a journalist doesn't necessarily mean I'm trustworthy.
Yep, absolutely. Again, there's these two projects. There's creating the software and then running a medium. And of course, the challenges of running a medium are a completely different set of challenges. And we're not the ones who know how to vet journalists and hire journalists and decide who's the best journalist. That's definitely something. So to run this project, we've assembled a team in Austria where there are people who have lots of years of experience in doing that, and not us would make those decisions. But the motivation of having it not completely open to edits to the public is just that we think someone needs to be paid to do the legwork, to do the research, to do the work that has to go into an article like that, because it is a lot of work to keep that updated and accurate. And so it's not about shutting anyone out or trying to decide who's trustworthy or not. And that would be a normal hiring process where you have to make sure to get the right people. Of course, that's a huge challenge that is not answered by our software. Again, anyone could take that software and give it to a different group of people, or even make it open to public contributions, and try to see if they get a better result like that. When we thought about who we would hire for that project, we thought they need to be journalists with some experience and some network, because that's probably mostly where you get your research from. You need to know who to call to fact check things and that stuff. But we wouldn't want to hire people who are very comfortable and happy with their jobs and have been doing that for decades and are very used to set ways, which is a tricky proposition, of course, even without trustworthiness entering into it. But thanks for raising that issue. It's a great one. We don't have the answer to that.
From the internet?
No, this time from me personally. What do you think of Wikinews?
Wikinews. So Wikinews is a small, almost unknown site by the Wikimedia project, which for some reason wants to get people to write articles the same way that newspapers do, in a wiki format. And they have a rule that when something new happens, a new development happens in something they cover, you have to start a new article. You can't go and edit the old article. So they just took the paradigm of print newspapers and changed who edits it to open that to the public. But so there's been, obviously Wikinews does not have a lot of contributors, and most people would much rather contribute on Wikipedia, where what they write has long-lasting value and stays there and for years to come if it's something valuable. Whereas at Wikinews, it's really relevant for a day, and then you have to start a new page. To us, that doesn't make a lot of sense, and we think Wikinews should work better with a structure like what we've proposed here. So, yeah.
Sorry, probably I did not understand. Anyway, is that software an open source one that we can download, improve, and share, or we have our space in your blog or something like that?
So unfortunately, it does not exist yet. This is a HTML mock-up. There is no backend. We just built this by hand ourselves. So we're only just starting the open source project and are looking for contributors. But of course, it will be open source, and you will be able to download it if it ever gets finished at some point in the future. So.
Hi. Yeah, I think I have two remarks. I like your presentation a lot. I just have maybe one problem with one of your assumptions, or the things that you mentioned, that you laid a basis out with, is the role of social networks. I'm a little surprised that you deal with that without addressing any critical point, or without having any kind of criticism towards social networks. I think they changed the infosphere in many ways, also towards a good direction. But there is a lot of there are a lot of problems in terms of, I don't know, not only data politics but also knowledge politics as far as social networks are concerned. And since we are here at a hacker conference, sorry, but I mean, don't we have to think about social networks that are more grassroots than the stuff that we are given right now? So this is just one aspect. And the other thing is,
can you give us time to answer one?
Oh yeah.
Let's answer that first. Do you want to go?
Yeah. Yes, we are thinking about that, but we did not think that the scope of our talk would be a good place to also have that discussion, because we've had that discussion countless times now, and we want to get on with journalism projects and reflect how the world is right now for most of the people. Honestly, this includes us, because we are not as critical of social networks as many others here. But it's a valid point. Let's discuss it, but not necessarily now or in this context.
I think when we refer to social networks in this talk, there's two things we mean. First of all, there's this technology that empowers more people to publish easier than ever before. And that, of course, includes Identica as well as it does Twitter. It really does not matter. It's just that most of the breaking news happens on Twitter and not on Identica for reasons that are beyond the scope of this talk. And the other thing is how news finds me, because I don't go to the front page of a newspaper to check out what's up in the world, but links come to me through whatever channels I subscribe to. That can be Twitter, that can be Facebook, that can be Diaspora, whatever. So it's really, that doesn't make a difference in our talk. And of course, those alternative social networks should have a place there as well.
Okay, yeah, I think I agree. It's an issue of its own. But I mean, I would like to comment upon that. But so the other point is that your project, the way you present it right now, I love the design. I really like all the ideas that are in it. I just wonder, it seems to me like that most of the propositions, or the way it is, designed now, it implies that a huge crowd, a huge audience is out there or is involved in this project, you know, and so like the people that are reading or visiting the Guardian or whatever, you know, so, or the Wikipedia, whatever. So the presumption is that there is a huge crowd, and also simultaneously there is also a huge editing team or whatever, and also maybe to some degree also a big budget also involved to be really able to realize that. And I just wonder, I mean, since you are obviously planning to realize this project and don't have the big audience, the big budget, and also the big team doing it, whether you're thinking, how to like really start from, which point to really, make a first step.
Can I answer that? So the point about the audience, so if there isn't an audience for a project like that, I think we're pretty much fucked. So I think there is a huge unmet need, the hands that went up in this room, but beyond that, an unmet need of people who think they should be informed about things, but for whom traditional news sources online just don't really work, because you check it every couple of days, you miss much of the context, if you don't follow a topic from the very start, you are pretty much hopelessly lost and can't, and just ignore it and when you visit the news site the next time. Of course, there's a budget issue and team issue. That's, first of all, why we apply to grants rather than starting straight away. But the way to bootstrap this is that, like we said before, you don't have to cover everything. Already, when we sat down to make the sample article about this one specific case, what we created here is the best source on this specific scandal on the web, and that was just something we wrote up in the weekend, based on existing sources, not even doing our own original research. So you can start very small, covering just big political scandals and corruption and economical scandals that this structure is really good at. So stories that develop over a long time. And I think you can start with very little resources. Of course, it gets exponentially worse as time goes on, because the more articles you have, the more you have to keep updated all the time. And that's a problem you have to solve. But I think you can start small, and I think you will quickly find the audience. Another aspect here is that I think a news medium that publishes news this way would dominate Google and other search engines the way that Wikipedia does for encyclopedic topics. Because as these pages don't change their URLs over time, they gain authority and PageRank and should be very, very prominent in search rankings. So that's one of the ways you would be able to gain an audience even without a big media spending budget and stuff like that.
But we already mentioned we have not solved the financial sustainability problem yet. It's not our core competency.
I have two comments. The first one is kind of in response to the earlier question of how you determine if something is either accurate or of the right bias. And my understanding of your project is that it's in contrast to other media outlets, which is usually one point of view. And so simply in your design, I think that you're addressing both of those issues really well. And the second comment is that media is a really gigantic market right now, and markets are driven by demand. And currently, there's all these different media outlets that are reporting on the same issues in pretty much the same ways, which often is always lacking information in every article, the same information. And if this becomes really popular, then 7 articles about the same topic with the same content isn't going to serve them very well, because people looking at this site will have no reason to go to one or the other. So I think it could really encourage different media outlets to focus on more details and providing something new to the market, which I think could bring a lot of really positive changes.
Okay, we have 3 more minutes, so one more comment or question, then...
I actually have a question to you, which is, I love the project, but I mean, as much as we like to rant about mass media, they do have some really good functions. One of them is bundling. So basically, you kind of Clay Shockley says, you come for the sports story, you stay for the war crimes, and you get to see stuff that you wouldn't necessarily look for, and you keep making this point that people wouldn't come to the homepage of LuxAT, but they'd rather come via Google or come via social networks. Do you have a strategy for kind of facing people with stuff they wouldn't normally be faced with? Kind of proc mail versus democracy?
So that's all we got on this topic so far. That at the end of the article you would suggest other articles, of course, that's pretty standard. And then we had this random idea of like picking out facts from other stories that you might not have read and asking whether you're aware of that. So this would ask you about some topic that you don't even know you might care. But of course, that's not a proper solution yet. Do you have more to say on that?
We've brainstormed on front page ideas for a while, but have not arrived at a satisfying conclusion yet.
Of course, there would be a front page listing recently updated topics, but we just think that this would not be the emphasis, and people would much rather spend time and come directly to the articles than read the front page every day.
I literally can't imagine when I've last been on the front page of any news source, really. But I might be consuming news differently than you are.
Okay, so if there's no more questions, then we're out of time. I just wanted to remind you guys that tomorrow at 1:30?
Yes. In front of the Hack Center.
In front of the Hack Center, we're going to have a very first meetup. If you care about all these topics at all, if you want to contribute to the open source project,
talk to us.
Please attend. Thank you very much for being a great audience.